February 15th is the date for San Francisco's special election. It includes the recall of three school board members and a race for state assembly. Joining us now to break it all down, KCBS political reporter Doug Sovern. Thanks for joining us today. Let's start off with this school board recall. How did we get here in the first place?
Yeah, and remember, the election's February 15th, but it's really underway now because people are getting their ballots in the mail and they can vote by mail, and most people will vote that way. The school board, the San Francisco school board made, national, international, probably, headlines, became quite notorious. First for their handling of the pandemic, which frustrated a lot of parents, but really the thing that sort of crystallized this and galvanized this movement to get 3 of the 7 board members recalled was when, in the middle of the pandemic, as parents were struggling with remote learning and Zoom education and all that, the board focused on trying to rename 44 schools, including, Abraham Lincoln High and Dianne Feinstein, and schools named for iconic figures who they felt no longer deserved that honor for a variety of reasons. And it just became this huge controversy, and it backfired on them. They had to rescind that. And basically, parents were fed up and said, this is ridiculous. And so they launched this recall petition drive, the combination of, parent frustration and this whole school renaming thing. And there was a bit about changing how you get into Lowell High. And one of the 3 members targeted had put out some very controversial tweets, and she became a bit of a lightning rod. So here we are. They gathered 80,000 signatures and put this on the ballot. And now you've got 3 school board members in a fight here to try to keep their jobs.
So recall supporters say that we should all pay attention to this, even if we don't have kids in the school system. And why is that?
Well, there's a couple of things here. On the one hand, they feel that these school board members are doing a really bad job and they want them gone. And they think it's important to hold public officials accountable. And this matters to everyone, not just someone with kids. They're spending taxpayers' money, or they're responsible for the oversight of that taxpayers' money, millions and millions of dollars. And there's a lot at stake here beyond just the schools themselves. The counter to that is there's an election in November, and people who are just generally opposed to recalls will say, why are we wasting millions of dollars? This is costing like $3 million on an election when there's one in November anyway. And these people will have to run for re-election. You don't want them then, vote them out. So and after the attempted recall of Gavin Newsom, there are those who say, it's just conservatives and Republicans trying to recall everyone. And in fact, this recall is not bad. There's a lot of very progressive people involved in trying to recall these school board members. But there's an anti-recall movement where you lump them all in together. Each one is somewhat different. But this one has become extremely contentious and gotten, as I say, national attention.
Yeah, so the school board has a total of 7 members. Why are only 3 of them up for recall? Are the other ones not involved in these controversial things at all?
No, they are, and I'm sure they would have been. But under the law, you can only recall somebody when they've been in office at least a year, which makes sense, right? Give them a year to do the job and not do it well if you want to recall them. But in this case, a majority of the board had just taken office, so only 3 of the 7 had been in office a year or more, so they were the only ones subject to recall. I am sure that they would have tried to recall all of them if they had been eligible. So only 3 were eligible. And remember, if they are recalled, who gets to replace them? Mayor Breed. Mayor London Breed gets to name 3 new school board members. So she's already said she is voting to recall all 3 of these.
All right, that's going to be interesting. Let's turn to the assembly race. The seat is open after David Chu stepped down to become city attorney. 4 people running. 2 of them are well-known politicians. 2 are not. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is interesting because there's a lot of musical chairs going on here and all over California, largely because of redistricting and people pursuing other jobs. This is a little different because in San Francisco, this all started with a corruption investigation. Harlan Kelly, the head of the Public Utilities Commission, had to resign. They needed a new head of the PUC. So Mayor Breed asked Dennis Herrera to move over and take over that job. He's the longtime city attorney. Well, then she needed a new city attorney. She appointed David Chu to be city attorney. He's the state assemblyman. And then Harlan Kelly's wife, Naomi Kelly, was the city administrator. So she quit too. So Carmen Chu, the assessor-recorder, was appointed to that job. So it's a whole shuffling and moving around at City Hall, and that's what has led to this. So now you have this special election. The big names in this race are Matt Haney, who's been a supervisor for a while, District 6 in San Francisco, and then David Campos, who used to be on the board, and now he works as chief of staff to the district attorney. Campos and Haney really going at it. They're both progressives. But then there are two other people in the race. You've got Thea Selby, who's a city college trustee, and Bilal Mahmood, who's an entrepreneur and a scientist. So it's a four-way race. And remember, yeah, you need a majority. This is not a ranked choice voting situation. So there's probably going to be a recall because you need a majority, and it's unlikely somebody will get that. So this election is February 15th, and if no one does get a majority, then the top two will go at it again 2 months later in April. So it's likely we will see this all over again in 2 months. But this is, a classic San Francisco race in that it's sort of degrees of progressivism in this race, and they're fighting over the issues you would expect: housing, homelessness, climate change, and of course the pandemic sort of overrides everything. But it's going to be close. It's really hard to say. I would say Matt Haney is the obvious front runner because he's the best known at the moment, but it's no sure thing.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Does being a well-known politician in this race help or hinder you? Because a lot of those issues you're talking about are issues that are frankly not going well in the city.
This is quite true. I do think that Matt Haney has been out in front on things like cleaning up the Tenderloin and fighting crime on the streets and the drug problem, and he's been very visible in the district. So the constituents know him, and name recognition counts for a lot in these races. A special election, typically the turnout is low. People don't pay that much attention to them. So if they see a name they recognize, or there's someone who they like a lot already, they may have already forgotten David Campos to some extent, except, of course, he's popular with some aspects of the progressive community, the gay community. So I do think it helps. I don't know that people blame Matt Haney so much for the failures within his district, but maybe some do. Being an outsider to some extent could be a benefit. But I do think in a special election, having your name be known and people know more about you and be more familiar with you has got to be an advantage.
All right. Then there is the race for Assessor-Recorder. You had mentioned Carmen Chu vacating that spot. Right. Looks like there's no contest there.
Yeah, Joaquin Torres is the man who the mayor appointed to take Carmen Chu's spot, and he basically has to be confirmed by the voters is what it matters, what it comes down to. So it's likely he'll win. There is Michael Petrelis, longtime City Hall gadfly, a certified write-in candidate. He has his fans, but it's extremely unlikely he'll make that much headway. So yeah, this is essentially sort of a ratification of the mayor's appointment, Joaquin Torres, and he would be the new assessor-recorder, which, is not, frankly, each county has one. In San Francisco being a county and a city, it has one. I wonder sometimes why that's an elected position. It's the person who, collects your property taxes and is responsible for doing the tax assessments for all the properties. It strikes me as something that it seems like it would be more of an appointed. I mean, if city attorney could be appointed, why can't assessor-recorder, et cetera? But although you do run for city attorney in elections also, but in this case, he's basically running to be confirmed by the voters, and then he'll hold the job, and there's no reason to think he's not going to win.
Okay, and the only reason I could think that we would care about that position, because like you're saying, a lot of the duties are, administrative duties, but right. That position seems to often go on to a higher political position.
Sometimes, actually not that often. I mean, Carmen Chu came from the Board of Supervisors over to the assessor's job. The assessor-recorder is often more of a more obscure functionary and not as political a person, but you never know. It can be a stepping stone. Historically, it isn't that much of one. I mean, my next door neighbor here in Oakland, where I live, is our county assessor-recorder, and he's quite happy to just have that job and be an accountant and not ever run for anything higher. But certainly in some places it can be a stepping stone. Really, historically, it isn't that often, though. But, it's a public.
Yeah, your neighbor can.
Someone in charge of public. No, someone in charge of public money. That's why we want, they should be accountable to the voters.
True. Okay. The political job without the paparazzi following you. Not a bad gig. Right. Ballots, of course, are due on February 15th. Doug Sovern, thanks for your expertise. We appreciate it with KCBS Radio.
Always my pleasure to be with you. Thanks a lot.